What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Facts on the Ground. I'm Misty Winston, joined by my co-host, Jesse Zerwell. Today, we have an amazing guest for you guys. She is a mother. She's a survivor. She's an activist. She is author of the new book, Left Out, When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. And she is somebody that I admire. You guys know I love my whistleblowers, and I consider her to be a whistleblower. So Tara Reade, thank you so much. Is it Tara or Tara? Because I've heard people do both. Tara?
People do both. Sometimes I correct. Sometimes I don't have the empathy.
When I was watching interviews like with you and about you, Amy Goodman did both, and I'm like, girl, how are you going to confuse me like that?
It's Tara. Yeah.
Okay.
Tara's a more common name, but Tara. Yeah.
Fair.
Thanks for asking. I appreciate that. It was really
of course. I'm sure it's annoying. Yeah. I'm sure it's annoying to have people mispronounce your name all the time. So okay, you grew up in Wisconsin, right? Like on a farm.
I did part of my childhood. Yeah.
Because I'm an Ohio girl. So we're Midwestern girls.
Yeah.
So what was that like? What was it like growing up for you? Like, did you always want to go to law school? Did you because I'm just kind of curious, about more of like who you are. Like, did you have brothers and sisters? That kind of stuff.
Yes, actually, I was born in Monterey, California area, and my parents left when I was a few months old. And it was funny because I ended up living there as an adult, going back to where I was born. But yeah, when I was a few months old, they moved out to Wisconsin. My mom was an artist and an activist. She was in Committee Against Racism and Progressive Labor Party. So she used to take me, at times drag me, I admit, to Chicago to demonstrations and things like that. Because when I was a tween, I was like, no, and like, don't take a picture of me holding a sign and things like that. But it was, once I was, I got the idea of the social justice issues that we were working on, and I got more, engaged. It was wonderful once I got out of that kind of teenagey phase. But we lived there. We lived down in Georgia. My mom worked for public television as a graphic artist for a brief time in Athens, Georgia. I went to high school there and then moved back to California. So I kind of moved all over the country and then moved out to DC, as you know, and I have a younger brother who's a comedian, Colin Moulton, and he's very funny. And I also have an older brother who lives in Wisconsin still and prefers to remain very much in the background.
I can't say I blame him.
Like my brother Colin he was joking, he has half the New York Times staff and Washington Post staff blocked on his phone, literally. So yeah, and Colin's doing really well. He lives out in Savannah, Georgia now, and with his kids, and he does comedy and has a great career and loves it. He's been on Showtime and all kinds of things. Nice. But he's very separate from what I went through because he's not a political comedian, so he doesn't, intermesh those. Yeah. And then my other brother Michael died, and whom I was very, very close to, and I write about that in the book, and that was very difficult. He died right before I moved to DC to go work for Leon Panetta and Joe Biden. So
was that something you always wanted to do, like work in DC? Was it just kind of something no,
I was
Panetta being the former CIA director.
Yes,
he is. Yeah, he is that. I studied classical theater. I was I was a theater geek and an athlete. I was both through high school, so I kind of worked my way in both worlds. But I loved theater and I did modeling when I was very young and made some money at it, and was out in California and applied for Juilliard and was partially getting in, and then my dad put a kibosh on it and I did not go to Juilliard School of Drama, which I would have loved to have done. So I ended up acting in La Bamba. I was a dancer and I did a few walk-on roles. I did a lot of classical theater and just regular theater, and some regional, some community, and some professional. And I loved that. I thought I was going to just be in the arts in that way and write poetry. I'd had some poems published, and then my brother died and I did what no one should do. I was in grief, and I just moved across the country and thought, I'm going to get into politics, because I'd always been politically active. And Hollywood wasn't very intellectually engaging. Like, even when I was on a film set, you'd sit for, unless you were a lead role, and I was just walk on bit, right? Or an extra.
Yeah, I'm glad they've gotten a lot better about that.
Yeah, right. So you sit for hours, right? And then you do your thing for 10 minutes and then there's another lull for hours. It just was intellectually not stimulating. And then so I applied for this internship because I was going to college and I was doing well in political science. And lo and behold, I got it and went to Leon Panetta's office and worked on an animal issue that ended up becoming law. He co-signed it with Congressman Lantos. And then I worked on congressional race and I was pretty much an operative because I had done volunteer work before that, but then I was like professionally just kind of in it. And then worked for Joe Biden. And the rest is history.
Yeah. And I remember watching your interview with Megyn Kelly, and you said that like you were really excited to work for Joe Biden. Like you thought he was this, you know, you kind of had like a why can't I say that word, Jesse?
Romanticized?
Yes. I can't, you guys know, sometimes I just can't talk. It just,
I don't want to say romanticized because I didn't look at him in that way. I looked
no,
more,
not that. I mean about the DNC, about the Democratic Party. That's where I was going with that. Like the Democrats, that they're the good party. They're the good, you know, the good team. So not Joe Biden, but the Democrats. So, you know, didn't you like, I can imagine that's really exciting as like like in your mid 20s, like, wow, I'm going to go work on the Hill. Like,
26. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was 26 years old. And I remember when we just lost the congressional race to Michael Huffington, as a matter of fact, big oil dude.
Mm-hmm.
And it was before he came out and before he divorced Ariana Huffington and she started HuffPost. So before all that. And so to get that letter to come in and interview, that was great. Flew across the country, interviewed, and I was hired at the interview. And Joe Biden was walking through the room and hired me. So
that's crazy. That would be like really like whirlwind at 25.
I was out of the interview, and then Marianne Baker was my supervisor, and she was asking me interview questions. He came, you know, barreling through with his staff, and then he stopped, looked at me, asked my name. I mentioned I interned for Panetta, and he's like, "Oh, good man." And then he looked at Marianne and he said, "Hire her." And that was it.
Wow.
What kinds of questions did they ask you for that initial interview?
Yeah, I'm always curious, like, what's that like? You know?
No, this was an interesting interview. She was so focused on if I would stay for a while in the position. They got so much turnover. And she was talking about that this position had a lot of turnover. You're supervising interns, you're supervising them with projects with the mail. That's why they said I was in the mailroom. I wasn't in the mailroom. We were all in offices, and I was just part of supervising these people who were doing that and sorting and whatnot. And then, you know, taking them constituents on tours. That's what the interns would help do. And I would brief them and whatnot. And there was all kinds of like protocols and things that we would do. And then it was sort of all hands on deck back then. It wasn't as formalized as it was now. So I would go to legislative briefings and take notes for legislative aides. I mean, it was just, I remember during one of the hearings, it was so crazy. We literally, all of the staff had to rotate and do reception work for 1 hour because, you know, and everyone had to do it. So at first I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I was so thrilled. And so the questions were more around, you know, well, this is a very intense job.
That's super interesting that was the line of questioning. I'm not at all surprised by that, obviously, but that's super interesting that they were most concerned about turnover and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they wanted you, or they wanted to start planting the seeds of loyalty in a way.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
In fact, they asked me what drew me to applying for Joe Biden specifically. What was I just applying everywhere? And, you know, and that was some of the first.
Were you just kind of applying everywhere, or like you went for Joe Biden specifically?
I went for 2 or 3 top. I went for some of the top offices.
Like pick your favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
But I had a trajectory in mind, and I really wanted to become an upper level legislative analyst, and then maybe even run for office myself at some point. And yeah, and then.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I've always been politically minded. I have never considered running for office. Never. So I'm always like that. I think that takes a special kind of person to be willing to do that. Not only are you like you have to put yourself out there, but it's really ruthless.
Back then you didn't have the internet. It wasn't the same.
That's true. That's
flavor.
fair.
It
Yeah.
just wasn't. Politicians weren't rock stars. They weren't that well known.
That's fair. Yeah.
It just was what it was. But I was really passionate about environmental issues, and I had been working, volunteering about the Marine Sanctuary Act that Panetta got in place. And I have to say that was amazing. The Marine Sanctuary Act prevented offshore oil drilling, and they wanted it so bad during Bush years, Reagan years, all those years. And Huffington even coming there was part of that big oil thing. And they didn't get it. And so the Monterey, San Luis Obispo Peninsula has stayed. And so a lot of species of animals and fish are saved because of that. So see, mine is more idealistic.
Yeah.
And I just had this real passion for serving my community and thinking this was the way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just to rewind a little bit, when you started getting seriously involved in politics, was there a catalyzing moment, something specific that happened, or was it more an accretion of experiences over time where you finally figured out here's something, or here are some things that I'd like to focus on, like the environment, for example? Was there anything specific that triggered your more serious involvement, or was it gradual?
Do you all want to hear a funny story?
Sure.
Sure.
It's not in the book, and it's a funny story. No one's heard it. Okay, I'll tell it. I was always kind of politically minded. And as a little kid, I had much older brothers. My brothers were 12 and 13 years older than me. So they were dealing with Vietnam, the end of Vietnam. And like my brother Michael went, and he went into a Buddhist monastery. And then my other brother did not go because he had lost an eye. And he was really into being an atheist at that time and studying Marxism. And so he gave me a book about Karl Marx, was explaining to me about atheism. So at our elementary school in Wisconsin, it was a bunch of Lutherans, that was kind of the church around there. And it was a very small, little traditional red schoolhouse. Like the grades were together. It was very small. We had a playground with a stump, and we would take turns performing and talking to each other about different things. It was very innocent and sweet and whatever. I was 8. And so I explained about Karl Marx, my version of 8 years old, who knows what that was. And then talked about atheism, about God didn't exist and it was meant to oppress us. And I didn't know what oppress meant, but we've all felt it. And then I guess, but anyway, people were interested.
You were out there black pilling the normie, like little kids on the playground.
What ended up happening is my parents got calls at the school because the kids went home and said they wanted to go to church. And they said, we're not going to go. They didn't want to go to church on Sunday. And they're like, we're not going to go to church. Tara says, and then there's Karl, and Karl Marx says, and they thought he was alive. Right. And so then, anyway, this is hilarious. So then the principal called in, and just said, we really appreciate that Tara has this exposure to all these things and wants to share them. And she shows leadership qualities, but we'd like to have her do something different with those qualities and not bring the Karl Marx books.
That's hilarious.
So they gave me the bus safety badge, the orange, remember the orange sash with the badge?
Mm-hmm.
They made me a safety patrol. I became a complete fascist on the bus and stopped bringing Karl Marx. And that was the beginning. So God knows, maybe it's best I never got power. I don't know.
That's really funny. That's a funny story.
I think that speaks to the indoctrination that runs through the American education system. And what they did there was essentially say, don't think for yourself.
Yeah.
And here's this. We're
Here's
going
these
to
ideas.
We're going to show you how to respect authority.
Yeah. This is how you think, Tara. Don't be silly. Think
what a
this
bad
way.
thought. Tell people what to do on the bus. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They were training a little tiny authoritarian. Look at them. Look at our school system. So ridiculous.
I'm trying. No. Anyway, so question cracked me up because I remembered that story. So thanks for letting me share that.
No,
Yeah,
so you were
thanks for
always kind
sharing.
of a little politician out there on the stump, literally. Literally on the stump. That's hilarious. Oh, I can imagine like little 8-year-old Tara, like, well, Karl Marx said.
Reading from the book, not understanding a word of it. Probably
That's funny. That's a really, yeah, that's a really, yeah, I'll remember that story. So yeah, when you get to Washington and is it as, and I'm sure, I mean, obviously it's changed and it's different, but is it as smarmy and gross as it like feels to me? Or did you still have kind of like an idealized version when you first got there? Like, what, did you start to notice that it was kind of gross? Or I mean, I don't know how I'm trying to ask that question really, but do you know what I'm trying to get at? Like, is it, because it feels really like evil every time I go to DC. It's very like oppressive energy.
It is now. I noticed that I've been to DC recently before this recent election, and there was definitely that feel. So I know what you're saying. No, I'm trying to gather the words because it was both. Okay, it was like there was this excitement because remember I was coming on the scene when Bill Clinton was just coming on the scene. So
Yeah,
Panetta, I interned for Panetta, and he hadn't come on the scene yet. And then at our intern lunch, Leon Panetta, one of the other interns said to him, hey, what do you think of this guy, Bill Clinton? He's doing really well in New Hampshire. And Leon Panetta turned around and said, he's a snake oil salesman. He's not going to go anywhere. And it always cracked me up that.
Well, the snake oil salesman part was right.
yes, that part was accurate. I was like, yes, and then
And
he won't go anywhere.
A little too kind.
And
Yeah,
Leon
that
Panetta
is.
ended up working for him. So interestingly enough.
Well, that's how it works though. They don't care. They don't have to like each other. It's just who can I use for my own personal benefit. If you're in a position of power and you can offer me something, then I'll be cool with you. That's basically how it works. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that's why we see people are still defending Joe Biden for God's sake. Like, you know, he doesn't even know where he's at most of the time.
Well, you know, Rose McGowan described it as like a cult.
Yes, she's
Yeah.
genius. I adore her.
She
Man,
is
she is
amazing.
like the baddest of asses. You know what I mean? That probably sounds terrible, but she's a badass. Like when she called Alyssa Milano a lie, I wanted to like stand up and cheer in my living room. I was like, oh, it's still one of my like when I'm feeling like I like if I don't want to go work out or something, I will watch Rose McGowan call Alyssa Milano a lie. I'm not kidding. I'm like, yeah, that's right.
She is really the real deal. And when she called me, I remember I was so shocked, you know, and so relieved when I heard her voice and she said, I believe you, you know, when she said that to me. And I remember I started crying because I was at that moment, it was really hard at that moment. They were just pouncing on me.
Yeah.
It's hard even to quantify the level of betrayal and pain of last summer and continuing on now it's a different kind of pain, but then it was excruciatingly
I cannot even imagine.
Yeah,
like I've sat here and like knowing we were going to talk to you, I sat here and like tried to which is impossible, but like I tried, what would that be like? And I even like in my like wildest imagination, I can't even fathom what it's like to internationally. I mean, this isn't just like in the States. I mean, there were international stories, and to have people smearing you and bringing up just the dumbest ass shit, like talking to your landlords. Okay, so Tara couldn't pay her rent in November of 1996, so obviously we can't believe anything she says, and she clearly couldn't be a victim of sexual assault. And that's, you know, that's some of the dumbest, most classist bullshit I've ever heard. I mean, calling on somebody's landlord and like talking about you, that's nothing. First of all, that's like not a disqualifier. That doesn't mean that you're a less credible human being. I actually wanted to talk to you about that because we have like a cultural thing. You'll see, I'm like a true crime nerd, and you'll see it in court stuff all the time. Well, that he's not a credible witness because he used to have a drug habit. Well, what kind of bullshit is that? That doesn't, first of all, even addicts lie for sure, but that doesn't mean they lie all the time and about everything. And you know, it's just such a weird thing, like that somebody's credibility is based on their class standing. I mean,
well, how that began was the Kranzensteins and Edward Isaac Dovier went after me in 2019. And the Kranzensteins bought one of my old phone numbers and then called people I knew. And how I know this is one of my friends in New Zealand got a hold of me and said, because she had moved to New Zealand, and she said, gotten an email, and she said they called from your number. And so I thought it was you. And they called from, they contacted me through this email. So they were really evil. They messaged me and said, if you don't shut up, we're going to post your bankruptcy. And I just said, go ahead. So I kept taking screenshots and I just took it to federal law enforcement. I don't know if they're ever going to do anything, but
Probably not.
they would say, if you keep talking, we're going to publish your divorce papers. Like, go ahead. People get divorced. People get bankruptcy. My friend that was a cooperating witness, they threatened her. They doxed her. They printed a bunch of things about her. My brother, Newsweek went after him. Washington Post went after him viciously, called him a liar. And, he was just a young kid when this happened to me. He knew what happened and he told him, yeah, obviously I'm talking to my brother. I didn't tell it the same way I told my best friend and my mom. Right. It's
right.
And, right.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Told how I told it. And they're like, this is different. I'm like, it's the same. I just didn't use the words vagina and finger.
Because it's your brother. And that's weird.
It's my brother. And he'd been grossed out. And he was at the time, like, because he's 7 years younger, he's like 19 years old or whatever.
No teenager wants to hear their big sister talk about this.
Your private areas. No. And they really don't. That was hard enough. Right. So, and then he still doesn't want to hear about this whole thing. But, he was really, he stayed in there for me and like talked to them, but it was excruciating for him too, like, and painful. And the way they mischaracterized me.
Yeah. They're really good at that.
Yeah. CNN especially. I found this piece doing my research, and this came out in May of 2020. And it's titled "A Complicated Life and Conflicting Accounts Muddle Efforts to Understand Tara Reade's Allegation Against Joe Biden." And I just want to read the first two paragraphs because this shows, I think this is exemplary of how front loaded
the propaganda is.
Yeah, the way they present what happened to you. As Tara Reade was leaving her job at Joe Biden's Senate office in 1993, she told a close colleague, I believe that was Ben Savage, that she believed she was being let go for an unfair reason, that she was being terminated because of a medical issue she had been dealing with. The former colleague, Ben Savage, described his decades-old alleged exchange with Reade in an interview with CNN. He declined to be quoted on the specific medical condition that he said Reade shared with him around that time. The previously unreported detail of what Savage says Reade told him in 1993 is among a growing set of accounts that has emerged about Reade's experience in Biden's office almost 3 decades ago. And what really hit me was the almost 3 decades ago, as if this was almost 30 years ago. Why are we worrying about this? Who cares? It happened.
And that's the propaganda. This is my thing. Okay. So Tara, I don't know how much you follow me on Twitter, but this is my thing. The propaganda stuff's my thing, like the media and all that stuff. And this, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about that because that's my thing. Sorry. But the propaganda, like the media coverage is so, I don't even know, malicious. It's vindictive, it's petty, it's heavily, like Jesse said, it's always front loaded. There was another, I'm not going to be able to quote it, but I think it was like a Politico article where it was like the title was like a question, and like it was very like benign or whatever, but then you get into it was something like it kind of sounded scientific or something, like they were doing some thing on you that was like they made the title sound scientific. And then like the first paragraph, it's like this gushing, like knob slobbing, Joe Biden's the best guy ever. He was known as like a champion for women. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like they weren't even trying to cover their tracks. Huh? First of all, what world was that? But second of all, could you be more obvious? Oh my God. It was unbelievable. And I know that you had a fair shake, or like had a hard time getting a fair shake, just getting the story out there. What was that experience like? Just getting anybody to even like talk about it?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. So 2 things. About their landlord thing. I think that they brought up the landlord thing, which was really classist, and people should not be ashamed of being poor. And I would say to any of your listeners, if you have a parking ticket or or you're late with your rent, or you have a bankruptcy or a divorce, don't be ashamed of that. And also there are privacy laws, so you can pursue that legally if you have the income to do so. If you don't, then you're like me and it's hard and it's just whatever. But what I found is that, and people that they interviewed around me, what they said that they would do is they would omit. So it's not just the viciousness, it's what they omit. They didn't talk about that I was an advocate for domestic violence victims for years, and that I helped animals, and then I, ran nonprofits. They didn't talk about any of my successes. They didn't talk about that I was certified from Homeland Security to train the trainer for domestic violence prevention. And that I would go in and try to talk to prosecutor's office. I would train them, and judges and military police and police. And I would go to different offices and then give them a training on domestic violence and stalking prevention. And all of those things were lost. So the only thing you know about me is that I was late on my rent a couple of times. Well, the two landlords they picked, those were landlords from exclusive communities in California, where, like, for instance, one was a yurt that got red tagged by the county. She sold the property, broke the lease, and I asked her for 3 months remaining of the lease. That's reasonable, 90 days. And I was very nice to her about it. She chose to smear me in the press. The other one was kind of known as, and that's why she kind of drifted away, as the town drunk. She was just always, and she watches CNN all day. And so she called in and,
Yeah.
And I just, I was amazed. I also found out that people got paid. There was someone paid $600 to smear me.
They will do that. And then they also like to use anonymous sources. They'll do that a lot. But they did some of the most vile stuff. Like they tried to claim, okay, you are a domestic violence survivor, and it was a bad situation where you had to go through like an identity change, essentially.
Yeah.
And so because of that, some of your like college records are kind of hard to trace and stuff like that. And they tried to use that against you. Like paint you as like you lied about your education. Meanwhile, Joe Biden lied about his education.
Yeah, and I never lied about my education, but I had to go to court and like get that in writing that I didn't lie. And Joe Biden never had to do that.
No, of course not. He's Joe Biden.
And just going back to the piece I mentioned, there's a video that goes along with it. Erin Barnett interviews one of the two authors, this woman, MJ Lee. And in that video, they open with the fact that you've made this allegation, and then go through the supposedly conflicting accounts that have muddled efforts to understand that allegation. And that includes changing your name, moving because you were a victim of domestic violence.
Right.
They go through all of that. And then after they talk about you changing your name and moving, they say something to the effect of, to be fair, most women who experience domestic violence change their names and move because.
But we're going to use it as a weapon this time because it's politically convenient.
For their lives.
Yeah. We just don't like her.
But you see how front loaded that is? They make you seem like this bizarre person who's coming out of nowhere making.
And then at the
claim.
end, they're like, but maybe that's normal.
But the thing is, they couldn't find, look, I didn't have a mental health history. I didn't have a criminal background of any kind. There was even a rumor that I had a criminal background. Remember that? And then they found out that it was a doctored record. Somebody doctored it. There was I never had any criminal background.
And even if you did, that still shouldn't like discount your experience.
The first rumor about me in 2019 was that I was a Russian agent. That was the first thing. When Lisa Lair from the New York Times first talked to me, she said, well, Edric Isaac Devier works for the Atlantic and he says that you're a Russian asset. And I'm like, what does this have to do? And I said, okay, Lisa, let's pretend I was. Does that mean I can't
get
assaulted? Like nobody, there was no Russians in the room in 1993 when I was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And anyway, that became a running theme through all the articles for the New York Times. And they would have sources, anonymous sources, that somehow there was some link there. And then Edward
always an anonymous source.
He would bounce between saying I was a Russian agent and a Bernie conspiracy, except I wasn't really a Bernie bro because I had supported other candidates. They couldn't go there. So it's just all these.
It's seriously like, let's throw something at the wall and we'll see what sticks today. And then
Noodles
we'll
of-
stick with that for as long as we can drag it out, as long as we can keep people thinking it, as long as we can take up the news cycle with that. And then when that stops working, we'll throw something else out there. And that's what they do. They did it to Bernie. They did it to Jeremy Corbyn. They do it to anybody who challenges power. They do it to Julian Assange. I find a huge similarity in the way that you've been treated, in the way Julian, I mean, obviously, he's
much worse for him, much
right.
worse.
But I mean, just the comparison in that, like the media coverage, when you do get media coverage, it's grossly, misinforming people. And, but yeah, there is like this through line where, I mean, like I said earlier at the top of the show, I consider you a whistleblower. You saw your, I don't know, is abuser the right word? Would that be right? I'm not really sure what I don't know what.
You can call him whatever you want. I just
Piece of shit.
don't call him president. Don't.
No. And it's,
Ben, but I want to get back to a point about Ben Savage. Ben Savage gave another interview to PBS and said I was fired for incompetence. And then he gave an interview saying it was medical. Well, guess what? After the sexual assault, I took a few days off and I had to go to the doctor. Guess what?
And what that does to you psychologically, of course, you're going to come back and perhaps be incompetent or zone out or be suffering.
You have to come back and work with this person. I mean, what kind of environment is that?
And the other thing was, I wasn't close to Ben Savage. He was close to Dennis Toner, who I complained about the sexual harassment. What Ben Savage did was really ugly because he knew about the sexual harassment. He saw it. He knew it. He was in the room during one of the incidences. He knew about it. He knew I filed a complaint. And Evelyn Lieberman's press secretary, she died, but her one of her assistants, we were standing outside and they knew that I filed the sexual harassment paperwork, and I had not talked to them about the assault, only the harassment. But I did that much, and he turned to me and he said, Tara, we will fucking destroy you. And those are the exact words he used.
And they will.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw that case.
And this was Dennis Toner?
No, this was Evelyn Lieberman's assistant press secretary.
Okay.
That said that to me. It was one of her staff.
Do you remember her name?
His
name?
No, I don't. Well, even if I did, I wouldn't say it without his going on the record. Like the reporters had, what was interesting to me is the people that witnessed the sexual harassment, and one of them stuck up for me and like got into an argument with Marianne Baker in front of me, and I talked about it to reporters. And she's on the videotape as well that I supplied reporters. She's never said anything on the record. And I think that's interesting. So it's just interesting. And the interns did say they saw my duties cut and so they verified that.
You were just kind of getting pushed out, I feel, probably like trying to just push you out. You were inconvenient then.
They said I wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
After the sexual assault, it was about a couple of weeks. They isolated me after the sexual assault, like 2 weeks after. So I'm thinking that somehow, because I didn't tell them, I think Ted Cochran or Dennis Toner knew somehow.
Maybe.
Happened. And because it was soon after that I got put all by myself, and then all my duties were cut and all that stuff. So
yeah. Well, okay. So I personally, like the whole believe all women thing, I personally am not, and I'm probably going to take shit for that. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I just don't, I'm not a believe all women person because I think that you should start with an open mind with all of these, especially with positions of power. Because I feel like with Julian Assange, it can be used the other way. And he's been accused of things that he's, in my opinion, not guilty of, and that the evidence doesn't really show that there's any proof of anything happening. So I think that I'm not like a believe all women person, but for me, you are like, I 100% believe your story. And it's in part because of Joe Biden himself. He is on camera. Numerous times being grossly inappropriate with both children and women. So to me, it's really bizarre that it's even, I mean, yeah, you should, I think people should still question it, and everybody should have a right to due process, and you should have a right to look into the claims, but you're not being afforded that courtesy. They just jumped right into slander and smear mode, and they don't want to hear your story, and they don't want to talk about it. And I mean, Joe Biden won't even open his Senate record so that they can see if there is the harassment complaint in there. It's very obvious that they're just trying to shove this stuff under the rug, and it's laughable to me that people so greatly doubt you, given the fact that we have an enormous amount of video evidence that this dude is not he's gross. I mean, that's
There's
just
other
me.
women. There's other people too that have not
Yeah.
gone. There's the other 7 women that did. And then I know of at least 2 that I've spoken with at length. And then there's 4 kind of floating around. So a total, those are just that I know of, and but not verified. So I don't want to give it, but I'm just thinking one of them did tell me there's no way, after watching what I went through, there's no way. And even my cooperating witness, who has stayed really, who came forward as much as she could, but has stayed in the background, because I told her the day after the assault happened. So I called her. So she knew about it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, your mom called into Larry King, which
Mhm.
your mom sounds amazing, by the way. Like the way that you talk about her in the book, and about how she, like, was really kind of ahead of her time, I guess. With like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was telling me, she was yelling at me, and yeah, I mean, no, I just,
That's a mom.
that's mom. And it's so funny, like but I wanted to come back. You were talking about journalists, and I wanted to come back to this point about how they front load. One of my first interviews, which I write about in the book, was with Beth Reinhardt of the Washington Post, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner. The first question out of her mouth was, "Is this Tara Reade?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "This is Beth Reinhardt from the Washington Post." That's how she talks. She said, "I want to know, you made an accusation against Joe Biden. Don't you know this is going to hurt his campaign?" And I was like, that's a question.
That is a question.
And then I was so green, I didn't know. I could have just hung up on her. Then later I learned, and pretty much that's what I would do sometimes. But
yeah.
But she had me go through my story, and had to do it for her because she didn't have it on the record. And she ended up asking me if he moved his hands upward. I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Did he touch your clitoris?" And I was like, wow. And I just I felt after that interview, I literally was on the bathroom floor sobbing. She broke me down. The other person that did the same thing was that one from Vox. What's her name? I blanked on her name because I don't like her.
I don't do Vox, so I don't know a lot of their names.
There was a couple of them, but yeah, that's
so gross. I mean, I get being a journalist. I do, but
she was trying to throw that out there about maybe I got pleasure from it, or maybe it was consensual. And then remember, there was a big tweet from a legislator that knew Joe Biden. His picture was with Joe Biden and all this stuff. And he said the way I was standing in the position of my body, that it couldn't have been sexual assault. And he ended up getting fired from the New Hampshire legislature. Remember that?
Yeah, there was the one guy that got, he said that the position of the vagina makes it impossible for, fuck off, dude. Like, what the hell kind of nonsense is that?
It reminds me of a story that was in the news a while back. I forget if it was a Saudi prince or from another Arab kingdom, but he was accused of rape by a woman, and he said that he fell and his penis accidentally entered her. So, and he got away with it. So,
of course he did.
Not
wow,
as though he wouldn't.
Right.
If
there's no accountability. There's no accountability for these people. This is what drives me crazy, is there's no accountability. Julian Assange exposed evidence of literal war crimes. Not a single war criminal has seen the inside of a courtroom. Not one. He's in prison. He's in Belmarsh prison without charge. He's just hanging out, waiting for an appeal to go through and see what happens. He's just in purgatory, chilling. It's ridiculous.
The last I heard, now, is this true that the United States might drop the extradition. Is that true or not?
I
true?
doubt it. They're appealing right now. They've already had the opportunity to drop it. Joe Biden could have dropped it the day he took office. He should have. Dude talks a big game about how he loves the freedom of the press, but he just put out a tweet today, I think, talking about how democracy, freedom of the press is the foundation of a democracy. Really, dude? You have the world's most important journalist in Belmarsh in a dungeon.
That's basically a rewording of democracy dies in darkness.
But listen, he didn't write it. Some dumb intern, not dumb. I'm sorry, intern. It's not your fault that you work for a psychopath. But get out of DC. But yeah, he didn't write it. Dude can't even, he couldn't like figure out which was Libya and which was Syria.
Yeah.
Well,
to be fair to him, he did help destroy both countries. So
I know it's probably hard to keep them together.
That can get a little muddled.
Your war crimes start to merge.
Yeah. All my war crimes just
like
kind of
like all the that you
all the war crimes just kind of blend together after a while. It's hard to keep them straight.
What can we do back to for just a second to Julian Assange? Yeah. What can we do to help him with his spirits? Because I know for him it must feel like the world moved on without him. And we think about him. And
he, because of COVID, it's been really particularly difficult because for a long time, the prison was entirely locked down. And video conferencing isn't exactly accessible to somebody like him on a regular basis. He hasn't seen his children since October. He hasn't seen his partner, I think since January, when the last time that they were in court. She said that I think it was today, she was applying again for an in-person visit. But there are times that he isn't even able to see his lawyers. He can't participate in his own defense. They gave him a laptop with the keys glued down. He can't really communicate with anybody. He does get mail. We don't know if he gets it all, but we do know that Stella says that he does get some. So, I mean, the only thing I can say in terms of raising his spirits is just the only thing you can really do is just write, and then just like do whatever you can to start raising awareness, because it's going to take mass public pressure. I mean, we need it's because they don't want him to be free. They do not want Julian. First of all, they're making an example out of him so that nobody else ever has the idea to do what he did again. But second of all, they just don't, he's dangerous to them. Because he does have the courage of his convictions, and he's not. I mean, he was 7 years into. I'm sorry, I ramble about Julian Assange. No. But he was 7 years into being illegally and arbitrarily detained in the Ecuadorian embassy, and went ahead and released Vault 7 anyway, which is the largest CIA leak in history. So he already knew he was enemy number one of the most powerful people on earth, and was like, oh, okay, well, here's Vault 7, and I don't have that kind of courage.
Yeah, he took on the empire. And I mean, that's
more than anybody I think has ever done for one person. He's exposed more corruption and criminality than all other journalists combined. I don't think that that's even up for dispute. And
he was the toast of the town for at least a few years after WikiLeaks.
Democrats loved him. He was a rock star.
After Collateral Murder came out, he was invited to speak, and he did at a TED conference. He
got a standing ovation.
Yeah, he wrote this excellent review about a Luke Harding book about Snowden. And Luke Harding
is a piece of shit propagandist.
This Guardian propagandist wasn't even involved in the Snowden leaks, but he ends up writing a book about
the Snowden leaks,
what happened, and sort of insinuating that he was involved somehow because he knows the people, he works with the people at the paper. And the review is just
brilliant,
excellently written, and
it's brilliant.
Eviscerates Luke Harding. And I always think of that because Luke Harding came out with a piece, I forget when that was, if that was 2018 or 2019.
Are you talking about the Manafort piece?
Yeah, the completely unsourced Manafort piece, and
just absolute bullshit.
Right. Complete bullshit. As far as I know, it's still up on the Guardian site.
It is still up. It has been thoroughly debunked.
And Luke Harding, 1969, that's his Twitter handle. Or it might be, it's probably 1969.
I think it's 1969.
I don't think he would go with 69.
No.
But he still has a job and has not had to pay any price other than being rightly pilloried for what he did.
He is a legitimate propagandist. But yeah, that's really all I can think of to lift his spirits. But we just, the biggest thing.
What can we do to get him out? I mean, as far as, are there going to be more marches?
Okay. So right now, I don't know where you're at. I don't know what state you're in.
I moved from California to Oregon because of the death threats. So.
Okay. I don't think that there's anything in Oregon, or maybe you don't even want to go to do you want to go to public events and stuff? Or is that,
Actually,
are you?
I was going to say, I'm going to be doing the Medicare for All is coming
Oh,
up.
okay. Yeah. I'm doing the one in Ohio. They asked me to speak at the one in Ohio. So
they're also allowing, other signs and other, yeah. So I was hoping, like if I'm at one of the ones in the major cities.
absolutely. I mean, you can like just hang up signs. Like if you could just like go like print out flyers and like go around and staple them on light posts. I mean, that's huge. Because really what we're up against is it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's the fact that mainstream media does not talk about Julian Assange ever. Like it is pulling to which is unbelievable on many levels, but forget the fact that this is a threat to journalism. I mean, your profession, because Julian Assange is a journalist. Mainstream media is garbage. But it's a story. This is a huge story. It's the greatest threat to press freedom. It's a hugely consequential press freedom trial and case.
It's a story of our generation.
Yes. It's the first time a journalist will be charged under the Espionage Act. And he's not even American. He's Australian. He's being charged under the United States Espionage Act. That's crazy business.
It is. And there is no jurisdiction. And I think that the jurisdictional issue cannot be, I think what they're trying to do,
they're trying to exert,
link it,
yes,
through the fact that he did it on the internet, and so that's how they're trying to get over that. Right.
I just don't think that they care. I think that the United States right now, they are trying to claim global jurisdiction over information and journalism. And basically this will set the precedent that the United States of America can, and I'm sure their allies too could probably get away with it, that they can go and get anybody, anytime, anywhere, if you publish something or share something that they don't like. Yeah.
We're seeing it happen right now with the so-called sedition hunters who are apparently regular US citizens, but they've tasked themselves with going after those who may have been involved or just present with what happened on January 6th at the Capitol.
Well, look what AOC did. I mean, first she sent out a mass email telling her followers that you should go on the internet and report people who say things that are unfavorable to me.
Yeah, and this is
and
the
then
trickle down
somebody
from
showed up.
Russiagate.
Somebody showed up to the cops, the Capitol Police, or the cop showed up to some dude's house because he made a joke about her online. That's scary.
Yeah, that was Ryan Wentz from Left Bitches. Remember, I actually did a op-ed piece. I don't know if you saw it on him, but yeah, Ryan. I think he went on Katie Halper as well, but he talked about it. Yeah, he had the Highway Patrol show up. Which
That's
if you
crazy.
know, like the jurisdiction of that is, I don't even know how the Capitol Police got through, but apparently there is. There's a link, like they can do that, and that is frightening.
Yes. We live in a police state already, and it's just getting worse. And then if Julian Assange is allowed to be extradited, your press freedom, our First Amendment, that's done. That is over.
I'm sorry, my cat was knocking over the computer.
Oh, you're fine.
Holding it down while he's.
I have lots of cats, so.
Yeah, so you know that the DOJ opened a case on me, and Twitter contacted me because they got 5 subpoenas for all my records, right? And so basically what I gleaned from all the research of that is that pretty much they did that with all my social media. It's just that Twitter chose to tell me, Instagram, Apple, I don't know. But yeah, like that's, and so the case is sealed, the search warrant was sealed. So I have no idea if I'm the subject of it, what's going to happen with it. I had an attorney try to call.
That's scary.
It was just, it's in the northern courts, and it was doing its thing in December. And, you just sort of wake up in the morning and you're wondering, are they going to knock on the door today?
Yeah, and Obama set a huge precedent for that when he eliminated habeas corpus.
Yeah, we've been on this path for a long time, but it's really been decades. And really since the dawn of time, your freedom of speech has been under threat because powerful people don't want their secrets exposed. And that's always going to be the case. As long as we have positions of power, there will be people who are willing to do anything to cover up their bullshit. So that's always going to be under threat. But really over the past 10 or 15 years, it has gotten so bad. It really started under Obama. I mean, he prosecuted more whistleblowers and journalists than all of the presidents before him combined. He removed habeas corpus. He's the one that went after
Deported more
Chelsea
people
Manning. Yeah,
than any other president.
yeah, he went after James Risen and threatened to throw him in jail if he wouldn't reveal his sources. Like, this has been an ongoing process.
Right.
But the Julian Assange extradition will, that is, I mean, devastating. That would be devastating to our First Amendment. And it was really hard to get that in the first place. And we're essentially handing it over on a silver platter. I can't get anybody to give a shit. It's really frustrating to me. Like, I reach out to people constantly.
Why people don't get it, because it could happen to anyone, any one of us now.
Here, I'll tell you why. It's because for the past decade plus, there has been a very sophisticated and very well orchestrated smear campaign. And you know what I'm talking about. They're doing it to you. But they have made this caricature out of Julian Assange. They've turned him into this comic book villain. He's a hacker. He's a rapist. He's a national security threat. He's a terrorist. Like, they've turned him into this person that they've taken away his humanity. And that's what they seek to do. That's what they're trying to do to you. They seek to take away your humanity, because then nobody will give a shit what they do to you.
And fragment the narrative
Mhm.
the way they have with Julian Assange. Like you just said, Misty, he's a rapist. And this should be noted
He's a
too.
Russian. He's a Russian, Tara. He's a Russian too.
Joe Biden described Julian Assange with the same exact language that Mitch McConnell did. Julian Assange is a high-tech terrorist. And I think that speaks volumes.
They have talking points, remember that journalist that linked the talking points from the Biden campaign that all the representatives were making about me. There was literally like a talking point sheet, and that's what they do. They'll get a word, they'll call it that, and then that's what it becomes.
And you can tell if you watch certain like members of Congress, they all have the same talking points. They they gussy it up in their own way, but it's the same talking points.
Same vernacular every time. Edward Snowden, the way he's suffering. I mean, like, I hope he and his family are doing well, but it would be nice for him to be able to have freedom.
Absolutely. Reality Winner just got released though. Reality Winner just got released. She is now at home. She's not even in the halfway house anymore, which at first I thought that she was in a halfway house, which is better than jail, but it still sucks. But she is at home. She's on home confinement, which that's a win. That's a good one.
That's a really good one. And Chelsea Manning is free.
But she still has shit hanging over her head. They could come get her again at any time. And they've proven that they will. I mean, she was in prison. They tortured her for 7 years. Was it 7 or 8? I don't know. They tortured her for 7 years, I think. Then they let her out, and then they came back and tried to get her to roll over on Julian Assange, and she fucking wouldn't. And that, again, like I talked earlier about Julian Assange being courageous enough to release Vault 7, Chelsea Manning, knowing, like, she'd already been through it, knowing what they were going to do to her, she still wouldn't roll over. And that's amazing to me.
She's amazing. She's a hero. She's definitely a hero.
That's the kind of people, like, I don't like the word hero, but that's, if I'm going to have a hero, it's going to be somebody like that.
Yeah. I absolutely. And, I just hope that, we tend to do what I was going to say, though, back to the whole smear thing. I had written, I don't know if you saw the op-ed piece that I did. In fact, I just shared it, Dissident or.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That one. They have a playbook and they go by it. They use it on world leaders, like what they just did with Vladimir Putin, right? They had NBC, this reporter interview him, who was just like almost yelling at him. He was,
"Are you a killer?"
And then kept interrupting him, and he's like, yeah, and then like he would listen through his translation, who knows how that went, and would answer, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, it's so funny, but sometimes it bites him in the ass. Like there was a BBC reporter who was trying to grill the president of Azerbaijan about his treatment of journalists. And he's like, really? Where's Julian Assange right now? And it's glorious. Listen, he's a piece of shit. Please don't come on my Twitter and tell me, I can't believe you're praising the president of Azerbaijan. I'm not praising him, but he nailed her. He nailed her. He nailed her. And it was glorious to see. And I love watching the Western Empire get their bullshit shoved back in their face, because it needs to happen more often.
I don't even know how they, with a straight face, like,
right?
Talk about human rights violations regarding
and the hypocrisy is unbelievable. Yeah, it's amazing.
and here Julian Assange was they're in England talking about all of this.
About press freedom. Like Boris Johnson put out a tweet too. It must be Press Freedom Day at the G7 thing or something, because like Joe Biden put out a tweet, Boris Johnson put out a tweet. They're all talking about press freedom. Meanwhile, Julian Assange is literally, not literally, but he's figuratively in a dungeon. You might as well call it a dungeon. Belmarsh is the Guantanamo Bay of the UK. It is not a good place. He is being tortured. I mean, this is not me saying that. That's Nils Melzer saying that, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. I'm not just pulling that shit out of my ass. Like he really is. He's been, prolonged psychological torture that we're going on a decade now,
it's not hard to find the what the Geneva Convention stipulate as to what constitutes torture. You can go online and find that information very easily, and he is being and has been tortured for years now. I can't
imagine what that does to a person.
I would include his asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Absolutely.
The seclusion.
The seclusion, he was spied on. He knew he was being spied on, that his visitors were having their electronic devices taken and messed with and, scanned and all of this stuff. I mean, they had microphones in the bathroom. I mean, the human rights violations in his case alone should be enough to throw this out on it, like just right there. Like just the fact that he was spied on by UC Global, that should be enough for this case to be thrown out the window. And the fact that it isn't should terrify everybody, because if they can do it to him, they're going to do it to you. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. And, it's, I'm a microcosm of that macrocosm of what Julian Assange went through. But my microcosm was, for instance, the New York Times in their first article about me accidentally printed my social security number. That act of accidental printing of my congressional ID with my social security number on it, the photo editor apparently made a mistake according to them. But that has made it so that I can't function very well in the world. Like I can't tell you, I won't bore the audience with how difficult that makes your life. But if you have too many inquiries into your social security number, you can't get a checking account, you can't function, it's amazing. So they get you in little and big ways so that you just can't move freely in the world. And I didn't know when I came forward that I knew I would get pushback from Joe Biden's campaign and Joe Biden. And at the time that I was coming forward, there's even talk he was going to drop out. So I wasn't sure to the level, because I thought the world would be onto a different candidate. I really hoped they would, but
he's going to drop something soon.
But anyway, they
I can't say that it's
fine. They went after me pretty hard, and they spent, according to FEC, they spent $2.2 million on PR with Anita Dunn, who was the founder of Time's Up, and who I accidentally go to Time's Up thinking I'm getting protection, not knowing that Anita Dunn was already working for Joe Biden.
Right.
And
and the Democrats really destroyed the Me Too movement. I mean, entirely. But I can tell you, I know what that's called. Well, I don't know what it's called, but I do know what Gabriel Shipton, who is Julian Assange's half brother, he calls it punishment by process. And so, and we actually have evidence of this. Julian Assange himself leaked the Stratfor files, and in there is an email where they talk about how they're going to handle him, how they're going to deal with him. And one of the ways in which they thought that they could deal with him is to tie him up in court stuff for 25 years. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. And in the process, they're torturing him to death. We're watching a slow motion execution. So that's what they do to people. You're right. They have the exact same playbook. I mean, they smear you, they discredit you, they lie about you, they mess. Chuck Schumer went on some Sunday morning show and said the CIA has 6 ways to Sunday to mess with you. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. I mean, essentially,
they don't even hide it anymore.
No,
they want because they're operating from a place of implementing fear as a tool to silence. And that's why I've been so proactive about speaking out about what Joe Biden did. You were asking earlier, and I want to come back because I didn't fully answer about the atmosphere when I was on the Hill. And, there was a lot of hope around Bill Clinton being president. I was at the inauguration. I got to meet Maya Angelou and all that glamorous stuff, right? Going to the balls. But the other underbelly of that was the misogyny and the objectification of young women. And I lived at this place called Thompson Markwood Hall, and it was the Senate. It's right across from the Senate, and it was all girls, kind of like dorm-like place until you could find a regular apartment. It was just really convenient. So it's kind of like a good place to rent month to month, better than a hotel. And you're right there. You walk right across the street. Boys aren't allowed after 9 upstairs, which is hilarious. So you'd see girls with their boyfriends on the back stairs. It was hilarious. It was funny. But we made a lot of friendships, but I also saw a lot. And I met a young woman who had an affair with a prominent senator, a Republican senator. And I won't go into all the details, but we had to kind of get her out of a jam, and she ended up going home. But she fell in love with him and thought he was going to, and she was 24 years old. She was not even 24, I think, at that time. And she hadn't even graduated college. And I mean, they would just, I mean, that's what we were there for. Like, as you know, Joe Biden wanted me to serve drinks at events, you know, and things like that.
Because he liked your legs. Like, that's just so gross.
Yeah. And that's who they were. So to answer your question, circling back around about that misogyny, I thought that had changed. And I remember when Joe Biden was vice president, I was still silent. And I had inwardly hoped, because I still believed in the Democrats, still clinging to that, even though I was getting more and more progressive. I still hoped he changed. And then when Lucy Flores came forward in 2019, and I saw her just get ripped apart, I was like, okay. And then my daughter was like, oh, you know, Mom, he's too powerful. You know, you're not. And I'm like, now I have to, because I don't.
Was that the combination of things that made you want to come forward, Lucy Flores, and then your daughter?
Yeah.
I saw you talking about your daughter, and I can tell that, like, I have daughters, so I can tell, like, you like really love your daughter. And I could tell that that was really like a turning point for you, where you looked at your daughter and she was kind of like the same age that you were then. And
She's
it was kind of
26
like,
right now.
yeah, that's like a light bulb moment. Okay, if I don't speak up, then I'm leaving this for her, you know, like, almost.
Exactly. Then this is generational abuse. That's exactly, this becomes generational abuse. And I'm sure Julian Assange had the same struggles inwardly about, you know, he has a family, he has people that depend on him, you know, and his parents are still alive, and he had other people that loved him and wanted him. But there comes a point sometimes when you're living in something where a truth, where, you know, this truth has to be shown. Some people believe it, some people won't. But if it's hidden, it's like a festering secret, and it will do harm.
Yeah.
It will continue to do harm.
Well, Julian's big thing is that you can't make informed decisions if you don't have all the information. And that's why he does what he does, because he thinks that, like, no political ideology can even have any chance of ever succeeding, because none of them deal with the facts. None of us deal with the facts.
It's all theory. It's all subjective.
Well, we don't have the information. Like, our government is doing things that we are unaware of constantly, all the time around us. They're doing things to us that we are unaware of. I mean, Edward Snowden released, or it was very brave and released the fact that the NSA is spying on all of us. You know, we didn't know that until a whistleblower came along and told us those things. And that's, I mean, again, to kind of paraphrase Julian Assange, powerful people should have no privacy whatsoever. People should have privacy out their ass. Like, we should have complete anonymity. Powerful people, once you get power, you should have no privacy anymore.
And the question, I'm sorry, Tara, go ahead.
No, I just said they need to be held accountable.
And it begs the question, what benefit would you derive from this? What benefit would Julian Assange derive? Personal benefit, I'm saying. What personal gain?
Right.
You're doing this, as you said, to get the story out, to reveal more about the truth of what happens to women in
the process, your life has been destroyed.
Insanely patriarchal society we're in.
Yeah.
It's in the patriarchy is what you're describing, is because we're coming from this angle where, and you see it in my Twitter comments, I'm sure you've seen it, where women say, well, why don't you take that lie detector test? You're making that accusation. And why don't you and then it's like, no, wait a second. I'm not a criminal.
Yeah.
It happened. And there was no investigation into Joe Biden. And I will be happy to take a lie detector test. Go under oath.
It's not
But
admissible in
Joe
court.
Biden has to do it. Do it. Joe Biden has
No,
to do
if he wants to do it, that's
Let
fine.
him.
I don't give a shit
Yeah.
about Joe Biden, but lie
Yeah.
detector tests are junk science. I wouldn't take one.
Yeah, I
That's why
mean,
they're
That's
not
just me
admissible in
personally. I
court.
wouldn't. Yeah, it's junk science. Like it really
Yeah.
is not reliable at all whatsoever. I mean, I have thought about that because again, I'm a true crime nerd, and I have thought about that. And even like my husband was like, "Well, what if like one of our kids had been kidnapped or something, and they thought it was you, and you had like." But even then, if you take a lie detector test under that kind of pressure and that kind of stress and that kind of heightened emotion, that you could fail. And then that doesn't do me any good anyway. So I think lie detector tests are crap, and that's, I mean,
well, and I think too, I mean, it's not just that they're crap, it sets a precedent for other victims of crime where
yes.
then you're, so I really don't understand why Dr. Ford did that, because it's like she's setting a precedent for other sexual, like this is what you do. The other thing that I got, which I want to ask you about your opinion about, is some reporters say, well, we need more numerosity.
Well, I think that's
report on my story regarding Joe Biden.
That points to two things for me. First of all, they're not journalists. Second of all, that's a word that's meant to confuse people and further obfuscate your story, because there aren't enough accounts of women, and not enough women have come forward, even with just regard to Biden, to pay attention to the story. That makes no sense. That means that's not what a journalist does. If you're that lazy, you're not a journalist.
So if there's just one victim, then it's okay. Like that doesn't make any sense. You know, like to me that's a cop out. Well, we can't investigate. First of all, if you, and I'm not a journalist, I've never proclaimed to be a journalist, but if somebody comes to me with a story that I was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden, who's running for the president of the United States, I'm going to look into that. That's important. Yeah. And even if it turns out to be bullshit, you should still want to, that's a story. That's a story that needs to be told. And so yeah, anybody like trying to cop out of trying to cover the story, I mean, that's really, to me, it's cowardice.
But the reason I bring it up is that because of some of the cases like Cosby, like Weinstein, like some of those, because there's been these multiple, like this line of women that then come out, it's like set this precedent that that's the norm. Like if, and then I've even heard so-called feminists say, because I can't stand that word, but because it's so thrown around in bad ways now, but
labels always are.
Like fascist.
Yeah, they come out.
I'm fascist. Did you know that?
Yeah, that's why
somebody called me that today again. I'm fascist again today on Twitter.
That's why I invited you to be my co-host.
Right?
Yeah.
It's why I fight for free speech. I'm a free speech activist, you turds.
Free speech.
Fascists don't love free speech. I don't know who needs to hear that, but fascists aren't big fans of free speech. Just so you know.
People need to hear that.
People do need to hear that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know. It's just, we need to really change the discussion so that we can move rape culture out of our culture.
Yes.
And like you mentioned the patriarchy before, that's part of the patriarchy, is institutionalizing it. So it's the norm.
Yeah.
Right? That's the norm.
Well, and the victim blaming, and it's, we've gotten better, like it's gotten better. We don't do the whole, some people do the whole, what was she wearing? Even with you, they did it. I remember the one guy that, no, women wore pantyhose in the 90s. There's no way that could have happened. Are you kidding me right now, sir?
Pantyhose in the 90s.
Really? It's always an old crusty white man who says dumb stuff like that, though.
Always. I know it is an old, because to me back then, remember I was 26, old women wore pantyhose.
I remember the 90s. I was a kid, but I remember the 90s. Like, no.
And that's when Victoria's Secret started getting popuy, right? And I was active and I had a boyfriend and I was doing stuff and
yeah,
like I wore what I wanted to wear.
And these clothing items are made of fabric. What do people think? They can't be ripped open by a violent assailant?
Oh,
right.
Like that. He was so proud of himself. Like, this couldn't have happened. I debunked it. No, you didn't. Sit down.
Those are mostly bots. Those are mostly bots. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's just DNC bots.
Yes. But, there's so many of them.
I wrote, one of the things that was cathartic for me moving forward with healing was writing this book. And so I wanted to just show you
Yeah, show the book. Let's talk about it because I read it. It's really good. I think people are going to get like a better sense of who you are as a person. That's why I wanted to like ask you about your childhood and stuff like that, because I think that like as in most cases when something like this happens, the victim gets left out, like the person, the humanity. Like I said with Julian Assange, they strip you of your humanity, and it's really unfortunate because you become this like talking point, this political football. And no, Tara's a human. Like she's a human. She's a person. She's a mother. She's a daughter. She's a friend. She's a sister. She's a human being. And I mean, even if you have doubts about her, or you don't, even if you like straight up don't believe her, treating her the way that she's been treated is really gross.
Yeah, and
I don't understand it.
You don't get the right to tell a sexual assault victim how long they have to tell their story,
or how they tell their story,
exactly.
Or when they tell their story, or why they tell their story.
But that's
not on you.
That's the sense of entitlement both so-called journalists and a lot of people have. The people who just roam Twitter all day.
You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? So like I came forward and then it was all about like, why'd you come forward now? It's like, well, I tried to come forward for a long period of time.
Right.
As I had said, I came forward in 1993 a bit. I started to, and then just got shut down. Then in 2019, and then again in 2020. And I think, for me, writing this book was cathartic, but it also, I discussed complex trauma in it. Joe Biden wasn't the only person that assaulted me. And I had a difficult childhood, and it kind of, I don't want to victim blame. So I don't want to sound like I am victim blaming. But what I'm saying is predators are very good at keying in on vulnerability. I mean, it's not something they consciously do. It's a subconscious thing. Right.
Yeah.
And I think in Joe Biden's case, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time for sure. There was that. There was just sort of this chance thing that happened because usually he was with aides. He wasn't always, sometimes he was by himself or doing whatever, but usually, and so that
if it wouldn't have been you, it would have been somebody else.
It would have been someone else. And not only that, I think there have been other people. And I think it's also, I didn't have, a firm root in the East Coast. I was from the West Coast. He knew my vulnerabilities, right? And I was young and unsure of myself still, like, because I had a different career and then I was in this career. So
he's a man in a position of power, and he has authority, and he's, bigger than life. I mean, I'll give Joe Biden that. He is a big personality.
I don't think he thought about it a whole lot, because like, I remember when he left the assault, like right after it happened, him just like taking me by the shoulders right at the last and saying, "You're okay, you're fine," and walking away. He never looked back.
Right. And we see that on a larger scale with what he's done to other countries. He destroys them and he doesn't look back. What was one of the first acts he took when he came into office was to bomb Syria, and he hasn't looked back since. And that is completely indicative of
just his
a
character.
Psychopath. He's a psychopath.
Yeah. He's only worried for himself. We've taken up so much of your time. I'm so sorry, but I feel like I could talk to you forever. Seriously.
Okay, let me tell you where you can find the book. The book
please.
was out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. TV Guestspert was the publisher, Jackie Jordan, and I really appreciate that they took it on. And you can find it at Tara Reade, Reade, author.com, or The Evil Empire of Amazon. It's on there. And
go review it.
Review it. Please review it so that the trolls don't have sole domain on that.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about real quick the Atlantic, the guy from the Atlantic who wrote?
We kind of like touched on it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, we definitely should call him out because
everyone has a nemesis. Mine is Edward Isaac Dovier. When my story about the sexual harassment, when I came forward, that partial bit and got shut down, he was part of the reason. It came out on the AP Wire, I guess, before he even hit the newspaper. Within 2 hours of that story being on the AP Wire, he was all over social media with others, Richard Painter and the rest of that gang, calling me a Russian agent and a Russian asset. I immediately started getting death threats. I had someone call me that night, said they were coming to my home and knew where I lived and were going to kill me. And for someone who had not been through something like that, and I was alone, I had no way I just had no way to put this in perspective. So I recovered from that, kept reaching out until I finally was able to come forward in 2020. Meanwhile, Edward Isaac Dovere stayed on the Russia narrative, and then he wrote a book called Battle for the Soul or something.
Mm.
I'm in it apparently, and he claims that I'm a Bernie conspiracy. I've never met David Sirota. I did reach out to many politicians before I went public. None of them responded to me, including Bernie's campaign. They never did. I never got
Joe
any
Biden's
help.
a good friend of his.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never got any help. I never got any kind of response. So to claim that my sexual assault and the sexual harassment and everything I suffered and came forward about, to dilute it down to some weird theory that it was Bernie's is ridiculous. Because Bernie never wrapped his arms around it anyway, and I never heard from him, and I never met David Sirota. And I came forward to Ryan Grimm in January via DM and didn't hear from him for a while. And then Ryan Grimm, being Ryan Grimm, his first thing was to look at the Time's Up and Anita Dunn and that connection. And he went into the deep dive. He's a very good investigative reporter. And then he came forward with his report. But my point is that Dovere just basically lied in the book. And, you know, how do you combat that? Like, he's just, and then he, of course, alluded to Russia. I still am going to be releasing a novel that was about Russia. So he pulled just things out of context and then created a narrative.
That's what they do.
Yeah. And that narrative threaded through. But I think what's really upsetting too, not just about me being used that way, but the Bernie supporters, there was a lot of them. And for him to write a book basically trashing them and accusing them of a, you know, conspiracy was really gross.
After he stole millions of their dollars.
Yeah, but it's still gross. I mean, that has nothing to do with, I am not a fan of Bernie Sanders in any way, shape, or form, but I will go to bat for Bernie supporters because they got screwed twice.
Yeah.
I'm mad for them. They don't like me much sometimes because they don't like what I say about Bernie, but you know.
And his silence is complicity. His silence is complicity.
His silence on Julian Assange is absolutely complicity, and I will rake him over the coals for that every day.
Never said anything about Julian Assange.
Never. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is the only one. AOC was asked by Jeremy Scahill, and she gave a ridiculous answer about how Edward Snowden should be considered for a pardon, but she has concerns about Julian Assange.
What are her concerns?
I don't know. You'd have to ask her because Jeremy Scahill didn't push back on her at all.
Yeah.
Oh,
He asked her twice because I think he was trying to like, are you sure that you want that to be your answer? And then she gave the same BS answer and she doesn't talk about it. Trust me, I reached out to her a billion times. Nina Turner's in my state. I just had an Assange rally. Was it yesterday, Jesse? My days are blurred together.
Yeah.
I'm sunburnt. Like, I was just out on the streets yesterday for Julian Assange. I contacted her. Andrew contacted her. We tried really hard to get her to come to our rally and she didn't show up. And it's like the third rail in politics. And this is progressives. Like, y'all are supposed to be fighting for free speech and the First Amendment. And
Jeremy Scahill's become a hypocrite. He's talked for
It's
years
so
and years
depressing.
about Trump's war on journalism, Bush Jr.'s war on journalism. And yes, there is some substance to that, especially when it comes to Bush Jr. But now here we have Julian Assange, as we've been talking about. Where's all his skin in the game? He used
Where
to be
are all the journalists?
He used to be
Where
good
are
at what he
you?
did, and now it's like Assange has put all these once good journalists into some sort of paroxysm, and they can't bring themselves to even say his name.
I think honestly, it's the rape charges. I think that has made him like the third rail. People they don't even want to try. And it pisses me off because now we have Nils Melzer, who has investigated this. He speaks fluent Swedish. He's examined the legal documentation. He has wrote and spoken about it extensively. Julian Assange was getting railroaded. This was a propaganda campaign meant to dehumanize him. It was very effective. Look at what we've got. Journalists won't even speak up for one of their own and the future of their profession. This will kill your job, you guys. Like Ken Klippenstein, I called him. I'll call him out. I called him out on Twitter. I'm like, dude, why aren't you talking about this? You are a national security reporter. And he's like, just to make you mad. Like, he's all glib and like shit posting about it. This is serious.
He's not a reporter.
Is serious.
It is serious. And you know, the thing is about now, I have not been as closely associated with your movement, but always supportive of Julian Assange. But I had understood that those rape charges were railroading. So I think it's out there that it's not true. And I think people know that it's not true because there was enough evidence shown. Now that I've had a chance to interact a little bit with Stella and of course, Richard Medhurst and you
She's
all,
great.
and you get more and more information, you find out just how deep this went as far as railroading him and the propaganda.
It's
But even
fascinating.
Even on the surface, though, I would have to say it's pretty well known that that was not a valid charge. And those, it's like the other thing they said that was ridiculous when they made him sound like a bad cat owner. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I mean, they just they kind of went over. It's like what they did with me, overreach.
They even had Crystal and Sagar from Rising. They did a whole segment where they made fun of Julian Assange, talked about how he didn't clean up after his cat and all this stuff, like laughing about a situation. I'm like, really? You guys are supposed to be progressives. Like, you're supposed to be like independent, like alternative media. And this is your coverage of Julian Assange. You're talking about like cat feces. Like, seriously, how about we talk about the fact that he's being tortured to death? Maybe we could do that. Like, it's a slow motion execution. Maybe we could talk about that instead. But that's the battle. Like, that's been our battle. I mean, this is what I mean for the past 2 years over 2 years since he's been arrested, because that's I think what lit a fire under the movement. Really, that's what got me more involved.
Right.
But for the past 2 years, that's what we're fighting. That is legitimate. It's all an uphill battle against propaganda, and that's why I want
still able to publish.
Yes, but it's very difficult just because they are so busy and wrapped up financially in trying to save Julian Assange's life. I mean, the legal defense that they have to mount is incredibly expensive. And they're up against the world's largest empire. And it's literally life or death. I mean, dude faces 175 years in ADX Florence, which is basically, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Labyrinth, but when they throw you in the oubliette and they just forget about you, that's essentially what they want to do to Julian Assange. He'll be thrown into an 8x10 cage, and he'll be in there for 23 hours a day, and his phone calls will all be monitored, or somebody will have to be in the room with him. He won't be able to speak with his family alone. Visits will be very few and far between. That you have to be on an approved list, like special administrative measures is what it's called, and it's essentially torture. And I can't believe that it's legal, but that's what happens in our federal prison systems.
Yeah, and it's exactly one of the types of crimes that he exposed, one of the state crimes that he exposed, the torture program. And here he is being tortured for exposing torture. It doesn't get any more dystopian than that.
Yeah, we punish our truth tellers, unfortunately. It's really sad.
Well, all right.
So
what we can do though is contact you, look at what you're doing with marches and things like that. And also we can write him letters. And
yes, I'll send you some information. I'll send you, there's a website for writejulian. I think it's .org maybe, but they're kind of picky about what you send them and stuff. So I'll send you a bunch of information if you want to get more involved. Seriously, I'll put you to work. Don't you worry about that. So yeah, Tara, thank you so much for coming on. Once again, you can find the book on Amazon. You can also find it on tarareadeauthor. Is it .com, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it's called Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. Thank you again so much for talking to us. Anytime you want to come back on, you can come back on and just shoot the shit with us. We would love to have you back anytime. So thank you again. Thanks for everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Tara.
Bye. Take care.